Something strange happened in Power Book 4, Force. There are moments missing, scenes that feel like they were cut out on purpose, and tiny clues that point straight to New York City. These aren't accidents. These missing pieces are part of a much bigger setup, one that leads directly into the next chapter of the Power universe. And once you connect them, the entire direction of Tommy's story starts to look completely different. Season 2 of Power. Book 4. Force ended with Tommy standing on a thin line between power and danger. Everything around him was shifting. The alliances he worked so hard to build were breaking apart. The enemies he thought he had buried were crawling back into the picture. And the streets of Chicago were turning into a battlefield that even he couldn't fully control. But what's more interesting is how the story feels incomplete. There are moments where it seems like something important is missing, as if the show is holding back certain scenes because they no longer fit the long-term plan for Tommy's character. Tommy came into Chicago hungry for a new start, a new empire, and a new identity that wasn't controlled by the shadow of Ghost or the chaos of New York. But by the end of Season 2, that hunger had changed. It wasn't about Chicago anymore. It wasn't about becoming the new king of a new city. It was about survival, about shifting loyalties, and about a slow pull dragging him back to the world he tried to escape. If you watch closely, you'll notice how Season 2 starts planting seeds that weren't fully grown yet, because they were never meant to bloom in Chicago. They were meant to bloom in New York. But here's the key. You can sense that the writers were originally building toward a very different version of Season 3. The way certain storylines begin and then suddenly disappear shows that the show made some quiet changes behind the scenes. For example, Tommy's war with the Serbs starts off with huge weight, then suddenly eases off. His relationship with Diamond grows in a strong direction, then pauses without warning. Even the tension with Jennard feels like it was building to one big explosive moment that never fully arrived. The pacing tells you something was cut, reshaped, or saved for later. Chicago itself starts to feel less like Tommy's final empire and more like a temporary stop. You start to feel the story nudging him, slowly but surely, back toward New York. Not through loud scenes, not through big speeches, but through these quiet gaps, missing scenes, unfinished conversations, and storylines that fade instead of ending. These gaps matter, because in a show like Power, missing pieces usually mean one thing: the writers are preparing for something bigger. Tommy's growth in Season 2 also hints at a future outside Chicago. Throughout the season, you see him struggling with ghosts from his past, his mother, Liliana's memory, his brother's problems, and the fact that he never truly cut ties with the world he grew up in. He can run from New York, but New York doesn't run from him, whether it's old enemies, old friends, or old regrets. They keep chasing him even while he's trying to build something new. That emotional weight is a huge clue, because it tells you the writers are steering him toward a confrontation he can't avoid forever. Another thing that stands out is how many characters mention New York without ever showing it. It's like the show is whispering the same message again and again. Tommy's story is not done there. The references become more frequent as the season moves forward. They feel like breadcrumbs leading to the next big chapter, not a Chicago chapter, but a New York one. So by the time Season 2 ends, Tommy feels different. The city feels different. The entire show feels like it's shifting direction. And once you look at all the pieces together, the cutscenes, the incomplete stories, the quiet hints, it becomes clear. The missing parts of Season 2 are not a mistake. They're a setup for Season 3, and for Tommy's grand crossover back to NYC, which ties directly into the future of the Power universe. There's something you notice the moment you read Power Book 4, Force Season 2 with a careful eye. Whole pieces of the story feel like they were lifted out, not trimmed for pacing, but removed because they no longer matched the direction the writers wanted to take. Tommy, these missing scenes aren't random cuts. They're quiet signs that the show's original plan changed behind the curtain. And once you break down these gaps, you start to realize that every missing moment points toward one big shift, the shift that pushes Tommy closer to New York. One of the clearest examples is Kate Egan's storyline. She was supposed to be a major emotional problem for Tommy. Her presence creates chaos everywhere she goes, and her connection to JP and DMAC adds layers of family tension that should have shaped Tommy's choices. But in Season 2, her story suddenly fades. She appears, makes noise, then vanishes without proper follow-up. Fans even spotted hints online, behind-the-scenes pictures, leaked descriptions that suggested Kate had more scenes originally planned. You can feel it in the way characters talk about her without us actually seeing her. That's the sign of a storyline that was trimmed to keep the focus tight on Tommy's upcoming path, not his past. Then there's Claudia Flynn. Her disappearance from the main narrative is one of the biggest signs that something changed. She starts the season with power, ambition, and deep personal conflict, and she's positioned as one of Tommy's most dangerous loose ends. But instead of building toward an explosive showdown, her story simply cuts off. No real closure, no final confrontation, no emotional payoff. It's the kind of gap that tells you the writers originally planned something bigger for her, maybe more scenes with Vic, maybe a bigger betrayal, maybe a deeper war with Tommy, but those scenes didn't fit the future vision, so they were removed or softened. The CBI storyline also shows clear signs of missing material. Season 2 set up a massive war between Diamond and Jennard, a war that should have torn the entire crew apart. Trailers even teased moments we never actually saw in the episodes. Scenes that were supposed to escalate the conflict got shortened or removed. The beef between the brothers ends up feeling rushed, like the story was supposed to stretch further but hit a sudden break. Why? Because a long, drawn-out CBI war would trap Tommy in Chicago for multiple seasons. But that's not where his story is headed anymore. Those missing scenes point to a shift in direction, a shift that pushes Tommy toward a larger goal than being king of the Midwest. And then there's Liliana, or more accurately, the lack of her presence. Her death in Season 1 was one of the most emotional moments in the entire show, and fans expected flashbacks, guilt scenes, or even hallucinations in Season 2. Rumors even suggested those emotional moments were filmed, but they never made it into the final episodes. No flashback, no haunting memory, nothing. That absence is huge because Liliana was the character who grounded Tommy emotionally in Chicago. Bringing her back in memory scenes would have kept his heart tied to the city. Cutting those scenes loosens those emotional chains, making it easier for the writers to push Tommy closer to the place he truly belongs, New York. Something else stands out when you examine these gaps. Every missing scene would have made Chicago feel heavier, more important, more permanent. But the writers chose the opposite. They quietly removed the moments that tied Tommy down. They trimmed the emotional roots. They shifted the focus. And in the Power universe, that kind of storytelling is intentional. If they're removing your attachments, it means they're preparing your exit. These missing scenes don't weaken the story, they expose the new direction. They show that the writers want Tommy's Chicago era to be bold but temporary. They want to wrap it up cleanly so his next chapter can begin without loose ends holding him back. And once you understand that pattern, the missing pieces of Season 2 stop being mistakes and start being clues. Clues that Tommy is being set up for something much bigger than the gang politics of Chicago. Clues that the show is preparing him for a crossover the entire Power universe has been waiting for. There's a point in Force, Season 2, where the story starts whispering a message that becomes impossible to ignore. New York is calling Tommy home. It's not loud, it's not obvious, and it's not delivered through big crossover scenes. Instead, it shows up in subtle hints, small conversations, and gaps in the story that feel like they're holding space for something, or someone. From NYC, the more you pay attention, the more you realize that Season 2 is quietly setting up Tommy's eventual return to the city that built him, broke him, and shaped everything he is. And that return is the foundation for Power. Legacy. One of the clearest signs is how the show keeps bringing up New York even though Tommy is fighting to build power in Chicago. Almost every time a character mentions his past, their tone shifts. It's like NYC is an invisible character in the room. People remind him of the life he left, the enemies still waiting for him, and the loose ends he never truly cut. These reminders aren't throwaway lines. They're strategic. They're meant to keep New York alive in the viewer's mind, even when the story is physically happening somewhere else. But there's one detail that stands out more than all the others. A single moment that feels small at first, but becomes huge when you connect it to the bigger Power timeline. When Tommy hears about things happening in New York, whether it's Tariq's situation, Braden's rise, or the federal attention building around the St. Patrick legacy, his reaction isn't empty. He pauses, he looks away, his expression changes. That pause is storytelling. That pause is the show telling you, Tommy isn't done with New York, and New York sure isn't done with him. Even the way Season 2 handles its villains hints at this shift. The threats in Chicago feel strong, but not permanent. The Serbs, the cartel pressure, the CBI drama, they all come across as major obstacles, but none of them feel like the ultimate final boss for Tommy. Instead, they feel like training, like the writers are sharpening him, preparing him, and shaping him for something bigger, something darker, Something back home. Tommy's greatest battles have always been in New York. His deepest scars are there. His strongest connections are there. You can't tell the full story of Tommy Egan without bringing him back to where it all started. And then comes the biggest clue of all, the missing NYC crossover scene. Fans who follow leaks and behind-the-scenes reports know that there was supposed to be a cameo, a major character appearance, or at least a direct tie-in with Power Book 2, Ghost. Whether it was Tariq, Brayden, Doze, Beat, Paz, or even someone from Tommy's past, something was planned. Something that would have connected the two shows more tightly. But for some reason, that moment didn't make it into the final cut. And when a scene that important goes missing, you know it's not because the writers changed their minds. It's because they're saving it for a bigger payoff in Season 3 or in Legacy. This missing crossover is important for another reason. It shows that the timelines of the Power shows are getting closer. They're moving in sync. Tommy's story isn't running on a separate track anymore. It's being merged back into the main Power universe. And when universes merge, characters collide. Tommy running into Tariq or Brayden again wouldn't just be fan service, it would be the start of a new era. One where all the Power storylines reconnect through one central point. Legacy. Another detail that supports this is the way Tommy's emotional journey is written. He may be building an empire, but his heart is still tied to New York. You see it in how he talks about Ghost. You see it in how he reacts to anything connected to the St. Patrick name. You see it in how he handles betrayal, loyalty, and violence, the exact behaviors that shaped him in Queens. Chicago doesn't change Tommy. It reveals him. It exposes what's unfinished inside him. It pushes him toward the confrontation he's been avoiding, the confrontation with his past, his mistakes, and the people he left behind. The most powerful clue, though, is the tone shift in the final episodes. The energy becomes darker, heavier, almost nostalgic. It feels like the show is preparing him emotionally to leave Chicago. Every victory feels temporary. Every alliance feels unstable. Every decision feels like it's pulling him away from the Midwest and pointing him straight back toward the skyline that made him who he is. And that sense of return isn't accidental. It's the spine of the setup for Power. Legacy.so.x. When you look at all these pieces together, the missing scenes, the subtle NYC references, the paused crossover, the emotional weight, the timeline alignment, you can see exactly what Season 2 is doing. It's guiding Tommy toward one big moment. The moment he steps back into New York. The moment the Power universe reconnects. The moment Legacy begins. When you step back and look at Power Book 4, for Season 2 as a whole. All the gaps, missing scenes, and subtle NYC hints suddenly start forming a clear path. A path that leads Tommy straight into the next phase of the Power universe. Everything that feels unfinished in Chicago is unfinished on purpose. Every story thread that fades instead of exploding is being saved for something bigger. The writers aren't closing Tommy's journey. They're repositioning him. They're turning Chicago into a stepping stone, not a final destination. And that shift is exactly what sets up Power. Legacy. The biggest sign of this setup is how Season 2 changes Tommy's motivations without loudly announcing it. At the start of his Chicago run, he wanted a fresh empire and a new legacy that didn't rely on Ghost's name or the St. Patrick history. But as Season 2 moves forward, you can feel the writers slowly pulling him away from that dream. The deaths he faces, the betrayals he survives, and the unstable alliances he juggles all push him toward one realization: Chicago can never give him the legacy he wants. It's a city built on divided crews, temporary loyalty, and political traps. No matter how strong Tommy becomes there, it will never match the empire he had the chance to build in New York. Chicago is power, but New York is identity. This shift becomes even clearer when you examine how Tommy's relationships in Chicago are written. Diamond is a partner but not family. Jannard is competition, not destiny. The Flynns are chaos, not loyalty. Liliana was the one person who felt like a real emotional route, and her death ends that connection. So what does Tommy have left in Chicago that truly matters? The show answers that question quietly. Almost nothing. Chicago isn't designed to hold Tommy forever. It's designed to harden him, prepare him, and send him back into the world he came from. A world with unfinished business. And that unfinished business is the real core of Legacy. Because no matter how far Tommy runs, the people who shaped his past are still alive in the Power universe. Tariq is rising but unstable. Brayden is stepping deeper into the game. 2-Bit still has ties to Tommy that haven't been fully explored. Paz has her own reasons to hate everything connected to Ghost's legacy. Even Tasha, hiding under witness protection, is a walking reminder of the life Tommy lost. These are not Chicago problems. These are New York problems. And Force Season 2 is built to show that Tommy's real story, the one that will define his long-term legacy, isn't in the Midwest. It's back in the city that raised him. Another major clue is how the show treats Tommy's victories. In Season 2, every win feels small, temporary, or incomplete. He takes territory, but loses allies. He wins battles, but the war grows bigger. He gains loyalty, but it only lasts until someone else makes a better offer. Nothing in Chicago feels built to last. And that's not bad writing, that's intentional storytelling. It's the writer's way of saying that Chicago isn't the end of Tommy's journey. It's the sharpening stage. It's the testing field. It's the place where he learns how to rebuild himself after losing everything in New York. Then there's the tone shift in Tommy's character. He starts to behave less like a man building a future and more like a man preparing for a return. His emotional reactions change. His patience grows thinner. His violence becomes more precise. His decisions feel larger, like he's thinking beyond Chicago. It's as if the writers are showing us that Tommy is outgrowing the city faster than the city can evolve. His ambition doesn't match Chicago's small divided criminal structure. Tommy is built for a bigger stage, and the only stage big enough is the one he left behind. But the most important part of this setup is how the writers are protecting Tommy's long-term value. They are not burning him out in Chicago. They're not letting him kill every main character and run out of story. Instead, they're keeping him focused, keeping him dangerous, and keeping him emotionally open for future arcs. This is exactly how you write a lead character who's meant to transition into a new show. Tommy's Chicago journey strengthens him, but it doesn't trap him. It gives him new scars, new experience, and new reasons to return to New York, all of which feed directly into the foundation of power, legacy, and that's the point. Every missing scene, every quiet reference, every unresolved storyline is a sign that the universe is tightening around one central idea. Tommy's story is far from over. He's not a side piece in someone else's chapter. He's not a leftover from Ghost's era. He's a main pillar of the entire franchise, and Legacy needs him. Once you see the pattern, it's impossible to unsee it. Chicago was never designed to be Tommy's final empire. It was designed to be his reset, his rebuild, his training ground. Everything the writers removed, everything they hinted at, everything they left unfinished, it's all fuel for the next phase. The phase where Tommy steps back into New York and steps into the legacy he was always meant to shape.